So I've wrote down a couple of lyrics, and I want to get into that in a second. But first, I want to mention Alan Watts, because he's on the previous album as well, and then in this album there's a few snippets of him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When did you first come across Alan Watts?
I'd say maybe about 5 years ago, something like that, or maybe 6 years ago. Just came across him on YouTube, going down the rabbit trail where it's like related video, you click, another related video, you click. And I think I was listening to Eckhart Tolle at the time, and that led me to Alan Watts.
And in terms of your lyric writing and then kind of the sentiment that is in your song, how has he affected how you write and how you shape kind of what you write?
He's really shaped the kind of the foundational philosophy from which we write. Like, we grew up in an American Christian kind of a home. So the way we viewed the world when we were younger is very different than how we view it now. But we were raised on a steady diet of Bible stories and Western Christianity. But so it kind of shifted from viewing the world as this like battle between good and evil, and this kind of polarization, and what do you call it? Kind of a dichotomy of the human, where you're always split between your head and your heart. And Alan Watts is much more holistic. It's a little more centered, and like things aren't so much good and bad. It's a little more Buddhist in that it's like illusion and reality, which has very different implications than good and evil. And I think at different times, both perspectives have their place and are a different way of navigating reality based on images and icons and stories. And so I think it just gives us more of a, just like liking metal and rock and hip hop, like hip hop has a very different foundation for understanding and feeling music than rock or metal does. But neither one of them is right. It's a different feeling and a different result. And I kind of think the same thing about religions and philosophies. It's like you get kind of a different result out of life and a different return on what you bring to life. And so Alan Watts just kind of opened my eyes and mind to a different perspectives to bring to how you relate to other humans and reality and stuff.
Right. And so if we look at some of the songs then, on the stories we tell ourselves, was that kind of the starting point, the kind of the framework with which you started writing, with what you just mentioned, kind of having these multiple perspectives, and then?
Yeah, I think it played a huge part in every song and every thing that we wrote, but I think the central idea with the stories we tell ourselves was inspired a lot by Alan Watts, but also from Eckhart Tolle, and this time around there's a guy named Tony Robbins. A lot of that was inspired by his work and stuff, with the whole idea of basically you're telling yourself stories all the time, and a lot of times we're unaware of how powerful our subconscious is and how powerful our unknown intentions. So a lot of times, like, just a simple response to somebody like, oh, I'm no good at that, or the reverse of that of like, oh yeah, I know I'll figure it out. Like, when you say those words, they're coming back and your ears are hearing them, and on a subconscious level, you're building the kind of the programming by which your subconscious makes a lot of decisions that you're even unaware of. Like, a lot of times you go left instead of right, and you don't consciously know why, or you went and talked to this person instead of that person.
Right.
And there's all this subconscious framework that you've built based on stories you've told yourself about what life is, and it all becomes kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy. And so it's kind of that principle of life that has made me and us as a band more conscious and aware to kind of step back and evaluate, what are we telling ourselves like every day, like about our relationships, about our band, about our fans, about the world, because there are certain experiences we've had that might make us feel something negative towards something, but it's like, maybe I wasn't seeing it right. So I don't necessarily need to now tell myself a negative story over and over and over, because it makes it more true. maybe I need to step back and look at it from over here and then have a positive spin on it. And then it actually undoes it. Anyway, I'm getting a little
but I get it because and especially in terms of being in a band and being a public figure of sorts, is that difficult to take that step back and to kind of rationalize what's going on, or reflect or relativize?
I mean, it's I kind of feel like it's my job to do that, so I do it a lot. I think for me, it's not hard to do that. My challenge is that I may do it too much, so I get lost in it.
Right.
So sometimes you can analyze too much and get lost in your head and get not grounded to reality anymore. And that's the biggest thing I've learned in the last, I'd say about 2 to 3 years, is I've kind of been learning this lesson of, like, in my early 20s, it was all about theory, new ideas, exploring the world, challenging old ideas. And then right when I turned 30 last year, it's something about it. I kind of I'm more of a realist now. Now it's more like, okay, that's a neat idea, but what does it mean in reality? Like, go out in the real world and prove it. And so I'm a little more grounded, I guess. But like I said, my job is to constantly get in my head and dive into the human soul and try to figure out ways to express it. And so you can get lost there, though.
Right. In that sense, then, because I think if you listen to a lot of the songs, they can either you can either perceive or interpret them as very insular, but also or as kind of looking at the outside world as well. Was it for you one of those things, or just a combination of both? Or?
This record was a lot more introspective.
Okay.
I was looking inside a lot more than I was looking outside, because I felt like the few years leading up to this record, I was blaming a lot of things on the outside for problems in my life, rather than realizing that I may be projecting a lot of my own shit onto the outside world. And because once you see a pattern in your life, like a negative pattern, and you go, okay, well, this is happening again. You know what I mean? That to me is a cue. It's like a red flag to go, hey, pay attention. There's some lesson you didn't learn.
Can you give me Can you give me an example then of
yeah?
Is it in terms of music, or can it be anything?
For me, this one was more relational. Okay. I was in an 8-year relationship that actually was a marriage for the last 2 years of it. And I met this girl the day my mom died. And so it was a very complicated ball of yarn of emotions for how intertwined and enmeshed and entangled it was, because I met her at that point in my life, and she was kind of there for me then. But over a few years, it kind of was like, I don't think that we're going to be good for each other in the long run. But it's very, very, how do you tell somebody that you've been through this very tough time with that? And that was a very challenging thing for me to go through. And then, because I did love her as a person,
sure,
but I think both of us knew that it wasn't right, but neither of us wanted to say it. And that's what the song Just Say When is about. And so anyway, a lot of these songs were born out of that experience and that struggle. And what I was talking about earlier about projecting, there were things that were very hard to determine if it was her problem or if it was my problem projecting onto her. And sometimes you get lost if people get enmeshed and they lose their sense of identities separately from each other. And so yeah, that's where a lot of this comes from.